Hello, I started working for Babylon in November 2019, and this is a little induction video for new starters. I made it because I found the transition to working for Babylon pretty challenging, and I was very grateful for fantastic support, but I wanted to make it a little bit easier for those that are starting after me, so I've made a little video. A couple of things here. Although the video is over 20 minutes long, if you look for the purple screens with the big writing, you can move to whichever section of the video you want to quite quickly and jump the bits that you don't want to see. And the second thing is that the slides with the blue background are the GP at hand patient ones, and with the pink background are the private patients. I hope you enjoyed the video, and do send me your feedback by email. Thank you. So the things I'm going to cover in my presentation are, first of all, understanding the difference between traditional general practice and working for Babylon. Secondly, understanding the difference between looking after NHS patients and private patients working at Babylon. Then a little bit about getting yourself set up from the IT point of view, something about processes, so referrals, tests, sick notes and prescriptions, and finally my tips to survival and, but not just surviving, but thriving in your Babylon work. Hope you enjoy it. When you see any of these purple screens, you know there's a new section starting. You can skip straight to the relevant sections in this video by navigating to these purple screens, and you do that just by moving this little cursor along the bottom of the video. So these are two example section headings that you can navigate to. So this is a 3-slide section on understanding the difference between Babylon and the traditional role you may have done in general practice. So probably the first most significant difference between traditional and Babylon work is that people wait for much longer for traditional appointments and often bring several appointments, whereas with Babylon the wait is very short, and so if they do book in with several problems, there's less resistance and disappointment if you ask them to rebook for their second or third problem. In terms of patient triage, in traditional general practice, this is done by reception, making sure they get booked into the right thing. Whereas at Babylon at this point, which is in the new year of 2020, it still sometimes feels like us doctors are the first port of call for signposting patients into the right service. For example, if they book in for travel advice, we then advise them to book in for the digital travel clinic, or we need to send them an invitation for smears. The patient satisfaction information that's collected is quite different as well in traditional general practice. It's much less frequent, and for revalidation purposes only once every 5 years, whereas on Babylon you're constantly rated out of 5. And finally, in terms of the patient record, although these are accessible to patients in traditional general practice, there's often several hurdles required in order to do that. Whereas on Babylon, the notes from your consultation are instantly accessible on the app, and so there's an important focus on making them clearly understandable to patients. Some further differences between traditional and Babylon practice: if you're running late in traditional practice, patients will wait in the waiting room, and if you're really late, they may walk out, which often feels rather catastrophic. In contrast, in Babylon, patients have higher expectations. They don't want to wait as long, so they may be more likely to cancel, which is the equivalent of walking out, but then they can rebook easily. If you are running late, you can let support know via live chat if you're running significantly late, and they may be able to remove some appointments to allow you to catch up. In terms of advice of a GP requesting advice from colleagues, it's often instant from somebody you know. Perhaps you knock on somebody's door or send a screen message in traditional general practice, whereas in Babylon it can feel much more asynchronous and delayed, and you can often feel unsure about the best route to access that advice. Continuity is quite different as well in traditional general practice. Often you can ask them to rebook with you for a follow-up appointment, whereas in Babylon generally they can't choose their GP currently through the app unless they ring the telephone support line. And in terms of messaging options in traditional general practice, there's usually a single method task system within either System 1 or EMIS, or a screen message. Whereas if you work for Babylon, there are many different kinds, including the workflow, live chat, Jira and System 1 tasks, and quite a lot of terminology to get your head round. And finally, in terms of how you manage uncertainty and loose ends, in traditional general practice, you can ring the patient back, or see them for follow-up, or send them a text message, or get admin to contact them. You can also save your consultation whilst you're waiting to find out the information you need, and then once you've contacted them, edit it and add the information in. Whereas in the Babylon work, you might find that you don't get your answers instantly. So and if you complete the consultation, you cannot ring the patient later. So you need to leave the consultation incomplete if you want to add in some information that you've gathered later. But what you can do after completing the consultation is send a patient an SMS text message via System 1. You need to remember that unless you complete the consultations, other doctors can't see what you've written. The other option for loose ends is to book a ghost appointment so that you can ring patients later. A few more contrasts. So if you're running late, patients will often wait for significant times in the waiting room, and walking out is a pretty bad thing. Whereas with Babylon, there's a lower tolerance for delays, and patients may cancel if you're running even only 15 or 20 minutes. You can let live chat know that you're running late if you need help, and also the app sends updates to the patient if you are running late. In terms of advice, it's often, in my experience, quite instantly available from colleagues in your own practice and from people that you know. Whereas with Babylon, the experience at this point is that the advice returns in an asynchronous fashion, can be delayed, and you can often be unsure about the best route to access advice. In terms of continuity, it's common to book a follow-up appointment with the same doctor. In traditional practice with Babylon, patients are not able currently via the app to select which GP they see, but they can ring support to try and select follow-up with the same GP. Messaging options are very different. In traditional practice, essentially you either have a task within System 1 or EMIS or a screen message, but with Babylon there are lots of different ones at this point in time, and I struggle even 3 months down the line to know exactly which one to be using. So you've got the workflows within the portal to ClinOps, you've got live chat, you've got Jira, you've got System 1 tasks, so quite a lot of options and terminology. And in terms of dealing with loose ends, this was a real challenge and a real eye-opener for me. So in traditional practice, if there's something you can't decide because you need further information within a consultation, you can tell patients you'll ring them later, or tell them that you will type loose ends at a follow-up appointment, or you can send them a text message, or you can ask admin to contact them. You can also edit your consultation with any pending information that you've subsequently obtained, and just make a note that this is an edit. With Babylon, you cannot edit a completed consultation, but you can add actions to a completed consultation, or you can go into System 1 and send a text message to a patient. Once you've completed it, you also can't ring the patient, so if you do need to ring them later, leave it incomplete, but remember that other doctors can't see your notes unless you've completed it. The other option, if you need to ring them back later, is to ask support to put in a ghost appointment for you. When I joined Babylon, I really wasn't prepared for just how different it was going to be. There were several IT systems to get your head round. Currently I have 11 different passwords and logins and 3 two-step verification systems. The fact that patients were located in London and Birmingham for NHS patients, and my own area is a different one, so new services to become familiar with. Then there was the introduction to seeing private patients and patients who might be abroad, which is new. And finally, the whole process of digital consulting, where you can't do a number of physical examinations, and the interface with the patient is often through the app, with all the implications for readability of notes, etc. So lots of newness to get your head round. This brief section is about IT top tips. The Okta system allows you to log in once and means that you're logged in to use several systems at the same time. So it gives you access to Office 65 with Word, Babel through Google Drive, access to your Babylon mail, and also access to Zoom, which is used for the virtual meetings. So it just saves a bit in terms of remembering different passwords. Here's a recap of the sequence for logging in when you're working. So sign into Okta, because that gives you access to Word, Babylon Mail and Babel. Then your VPN using the Google Authenticate app on your phone. Insert your smart card and choose GP at hand. Log into System 1, again choosing GP at hand. Log into your Babylon clinical portal, and finally make sure you're signed into Slack, and you might want to have browsers open for the BNF and CKS. These are a few techie tips that you want to sort out at the beginning, so they don't need doing every time. So sorting out the connection between your Dell and your printer, and you might need IT to help you with that, and also if you want to set up a second screen. Getting a text expander is absolutely crucial, and you'll need IT to help install that for you. I've got a slide a bit later that explains what text expanders do. You want to have a go generating a 2-week wait and a safeguarding referral on a dummy patient, so you know that's all working. And you want to check that your name appears on the ICE as a requester. Make sure you've registered for your support password on the portal for Jira tickets, and also download the Babylon app on your phone so you know what it looks like to the patient. If you have a personal Google account, that may sometimes interfere with your access to Babel, so that's something you may want to get sorted out. And finally, sometimes System 1 defers back to a very small font when you log into ICE, and there is a way to sort that out, a fix for that that's available on Slack. And here's a list of techie tips for each time you log in. So sign into Okta because it cuts out the need to log in separately for Word, Babel Mail, and Zoom and Babel on Google Drive. Keep several tabs open for Babel, Slack, CKSBNF and the Babylon portal. If you right click on each patient on the portal, that opens a separate tab and allows you to keep the surgery list visible. Always power up your laptop from the completely off situation and allow yourself 15 minutes to get fully logged on before your first patient. Keep all your passwords handy because inevitably there are moments when either the systems crash or there is a loss of connection and you may need to reboot and start again. This short section is about understanding the differences between dealing with NHS patients, GP at hand, versus private patients. So this is an overview of the actions you can take on the portal. So NHS patients have these tabs that you can see on the left, and private patients have the tabs you can see on the right. Occasionally, you will be taking private actions for NHS patients, like generating a private referral for an NHS patient. So just to highlight the ones that appear for the same action. So investigations for NHS patients, tests for private patients, NHS referral for the NHS, referrals for the private patient, and letters and Med 3s on the NHS side, sick notes on the private patient side. A couple of tabs are specific only to GP at hand patients, so NHS appointment is used to generate a face-to-face appointment for a blood test or GP face-to-face appointment, for example. And there's also ClinOps task, which is a task to the support or admin team. And then on the right, the prescriptions tab, which is to generate prescriptions for private patients. Obviously, for NHS patients, those are generated on System 1. So let's look at some contrasts between NHS and private patients in terms of actions. So if you need to generate a face-to-face appointment following a digital appointment, this is done by sending an invitation by selecting NHS appointment on the workflow. Whereas for private patients, you can't actually generate a face-to-face GP appointment. If they really need to be examined, your options are for an emergency to send them to an A&E or a walk-in centre, or if it's less urgent, to refer them for a private specialist to see them. For the consultation record, it's quite an important difference. For NHS patients, you have access to the full medical record via System 1, whereas for private patients you don't, so you need to be more thorough in your history taking. For both of them you write on the portal and those notes need to be understandable. In terms of the check at the beginning, it's a 3-point ID check and confirming location for NHS patients. For private patients, you also have to consent that you have to check that they consent to inform their GP. For tests, you request the tests on ICE for NHS patients and add an invitation for an NHS appointment if they need to go in for bloods, for example. You wouldn't need to do this if it's a home urine test, whereas for private patients you just select workflow and tests. For NHS referrals, you do those by sending a workflow, selecting NHS referrals and select the specialty, whereas for private patients you can't do NHS referrals. For private referrals, you again select the workflow option of referrals on the private side. Even for NHS patients, these are generated automatically and sent to their email address, and the same happens for private patients. Regarding 2-week wait and safeguarding referrals, there is a specific template that you must generate on System 1 for NHS patients, and you also send a workflow selecting NHS referrals. For private patients, it's not possible to do 2-week wait referrals, so you must signpost them back to the NHS to have appropriately urgent action taken. Further contrasts between GP at hand and private patients here. So prescriptions are done on EPS for GP at hand patients. You just need to confirm the pharmacy is correct, but you can't do NHS prescriptions for private patients. You can do private scripts for NHS patients, but they are printed off at head office, as are non-formulary requests, and you need to send a System 1 task that has a template in it to the head office in order to make sure that happens. For private patients, you just issue the prescription in the portal, print it and post it. Med3s can be issued on NHS patients by selecting the relevant letters Med3 selection, but you also need to generate the Med3 on System 1. You cannot generate Med3s for private patients. You can generate private sick notes for NHS patients by selecting the To Whom It May Concern option under Letters. For private patients, you can generate a private sick note which can last up to 2 weeks. There's no option for backdating. It gets emailed to the patient, and you basically select sick note on the portal. This is a quick look at how referrals are generated for both NHS and private patients. Looking first at NHS referrals, so you select the NHS referrals workflow tab. That opens up this box that shows you the additional fields you have to complete. So type, interpreter, mobility, urgent and clinical notes, and under type you will see this drop-down list of specialties. You need to remember that 2-week wait and safeguarding letters must be created on the templates in System 1, and remember to save your System 1 record. It's also worth having a look for on Slack and Slack Gems for screenshots of how to generate 2-week wait letters, and this has been created by Marique. This is just a quick overview of the algorithm for managing safeguarding concerns and referrals, and so there's one of these for adults and for children, and so just be aware that they exist on Babble. So having a quick look here at private referrals, so the pink background means private patients. You select the referrals tab. This opens up this box on the left which shows that you need to select what category. So the categories are specialty, therapy, GP or accident and emergency, and this can be useful where you think they need to attend, for example, A&E after your digital assessment, so it generates a letter to their email to send to A&E, but most of the time you'll be doing referral to a specialty. So selecting specialty will open up this drop-down list where you could find the relevant specialty, and if you select the therapy option, that will open a different drop-down list which is visible here, which includes CBT, addiction, speech and language, nutrition, Bupa and ECBT, and obviously these are all subject to change. And you're reminded that private referrals are sent to the patient's registered email address after you complete the consultation, so you just need to make sure that you've got consent for this and check their email address, and then they take steps with their insurer or consultant to arrange their appointment. This is a quick overview about sick notes on the Babylon portal. So to generate sick notes for NHS patients, you select letters in Med3, and then you go onto System 1 and you create a Med3. Remember to save the System 1 record when you exit, and a hard copy is posted to the patient by support. For private patients, you select sick notes, and private sick notes cannot be backdated. They can be issued for a maximum of 2 weeks, and they are emailed, so sent electronically to the patient's email address, so you need to just check that they consent to this and that they confirm their email address. They also can't be used for social security purposes. Let's look at generating a blood test for an NHS patient. So you select NHS investigation, and then that opens up this drop-down list, and you select other pathology appointment because it's not home testing, ultrasound or x-ray. And then you need to generate an appointment for them to go into their blood test. So select NHS actions, face-to-face appointments, and then select nurse HCA, and that will open up another box of options, and you're going to select blood test. You will be reminded on this screen that you must add the tests to ICE to avoid delays, and so you add these to ICE. The only tests that you can't add later if you're running late are x-ray requests, because you might need to check with a patient which hospital they prefer, and remember always to save the System 1 record. For For NHS patients needing urinal swab tests, you select NHS investigation and then the home testing one, and you also need to add the tests to ICE and remember to save it to the System 1 record. Support will then post bottles and samples to patients with instructions on how and where to hand in, and for urgent samples, urine samples, the patient needs to ring support to find the nearest clinic where they can hand it in straight away. So what are your options if you need to follow up your digital consultation with a physical examination in a face-to-face appointment? So for follow-up face-to-face appointments for NHS patients, you select NHS appointment and then select face-to-face and GP appointment, then selecting the type of examination you want, whether they need a chaperone and the expected duration. Whereas for private patients there is no option to see a GP generally, and so you need to consider whether it can wait for them to go to their regular NHS GP with the wait that may be involved, whether it's urgent enough to go to A&E or a walk-in centre, or whether it can go be followed up by a private specialist, remembering that there is no guarantee of urgent appointments with a private specialist. So generally for urgent things they do need to go back to the GP, particularly 2-week waits. This is a quick overview of the prescribing differences between NHS GP at hand patients and private patients. So for prescriptions for NHS patients, there is no option to do this on the portal. It's all done on System 1. You need to confirm, selecting this icon, that their nominated chemist is correct, and then you add the medication, issue the prescription, save the System 1 record, don't select print. If it's a particular prescription that will need to be printed off at head office, for example it's private or non-formulary, then you need to generate a System 1 task using the FP10 template. Recently became aware that you can easily find the GP at hand formulary under the links and resources in the bottom of the right hand side on the Babylon portal, and that's very handy. This is just a screenshot of how you set up the repeat prescription template on System 1. There's a little video of this on Babel, and it's also worth flagging up that although patients can request repeat prescriptions on their app, they can only do this if the first issue has been done by a doctor. To issue prescriptions for a private patient, you select the Prescriptions tab, which opens up a separate window with the relevant fields. It's worth having the BNF open in your browser, and then you print the prescription and post it off in the envelopes provided by Babylon. Prescribing for private patients is subject to a specific policy, and I've just highlighted a few groups of medications here. So for example, you don't initiate or prescribe controlled drugs, injectables, off-label or unlicensed medications to private patients. We also don't initiate or prescribe any specialist medications like DMARD or tamoxifen or any shared care medications. Medications commonly used for chronic disease in general practice can be prescribed but isn't generally initiated, so things for hypertension, asthma and epilepsy. Antidepressants can be initiated and prescribed for up to 3 months with prescriptions of up to 28 days at a time. Contraception is commonly prescribed and initiated, again up to 6 months, only 28 days if no sharing of the GP record. And salbutamol is also initiated and prescribed. This is a helpful summary from the policy on prescribing for private patients that you can find on Babel. The next section is just about how you access support for various clinical matters during your Babylon shift. When you need the administrative or support team to do things that are specific to a patient, for NHS patients you use the ClinOps tasks workflow option, and this generates an additional window which has the following options: create or modify prescription, chase referral status, chase investigation, upload data or other. This slide just talks you through what happens when you select support team queries. If you're raising a clinical issue, opens up another window where you need to put in 3 forms of ID taken from the patient record, and you have to write these in yourself. At this point in time there isn't an option to automatically populate it from the portal or indeed to copy and paste, and this ticket is what's known as a GIRA ticket. The portal offers a variety of support options, and as a new starter I don't always select the right one for my problem, so this is trying to show you what there is. The live chat with support is for when you need help but it's not patient specific, so for example you're running behind and you need some extra time allocated or some slots blocked off. The Contacts Senior Clinical Team opens up this range of options, so support team queries, medication queries, care coordination, safeguarding and senior medical team queries. The Contact IT opens up these options visible here, and the Get Portal Help opens up these options here, issue on the system, language, text, feature, etc. If I'm stuck during a surgery, I tend to resort to these two phone numbers, either IT or the GP hotline. I found it particularly difficult to keep all the information about different processes handy when I was working, so I took all the information I got off Schoology, Slack, Babbel and colleague feedback and created my quick reference crib sheets, which I have open all the time. They're on a Google document and I can share them via a link, and they look a little bit like this, and it's made my consulting much easier. Because the patient record needs to be readily understandable by patients and often includes important advice, I have a collection of bits of text which I've collated from colleagues at Babylon, and I put them in my text expander, but I also have them in a Google Documents document, and these are things around common scenarios on Babylon consultations or follow-up actions for patients. If you've never used text shortcuts or text expanders, I have a little video that explains why they're so fantastically helpful, not just with improved timekeeping, but also in terms of being providing consistency and quality of records, because you can embed red flags into the history examination safety netting, and also it really reduces cognitive demand, because they act as aid memoirs. And finally, patients are hugely satisfied with being able to have a detailed written copy of the advice you're giving them, whether it's electronically or in my traditional practice I print out the consultation. Occasionally you have patients that have been booked, not out of their own initiative, but because they've been advised to do so for a variety of reasons. So it's worth having a checklist of things to check, because sometimes you can be in a situation where you don't know why they're there and they don't know why they're there. So on the clinical side, so remembering that on System 1 there's a clinical tab and an admin tab. On the clinical tab, look at the tab journal. There may be some indications there relating to test results. Look at the med review date and see whether the medication review date has passed, or whether the full number of authorised issues has been given, and so they need to have a review with a GP. On the admin tab of System 1, it's worth checking tasks and also the SMS messages. Hopefully between all these things you are able to find out exactly why they've booked in, and they've been advised to do so. Here are some example text expanders that I use. So this one, && kid, is when a digital appointment for a child has been booked in the parent's name. So it's what you need to tell them in order for the digital appointment process to be done properly. So it's got to be done under the child's name with a video slot and so on. This one is when you're being asked to prescribe something off formulary, and I put that in the notes and it goes to the patient, so they know there may be a delay in issuing it because head office has to approve it. This goes in if I'm issuing a sick note, so it tells the patient that it will be issued to them by post if it's NHS, or that a private sick note has been issued and emailed to them, and I delete whichever sentence is not relevant for the patient. This shortcut & BL test is what the process is for blood tests, so that I've sent an invitation for them to book a blood test via the app, or do it by telephone, and they may receive a text message with the result and may need a follow-up appointment to discuss the result. & pick is when you need to rebook the appointment with the benefit of a photograph, and that's what I put in the record. Here are some example text expanders I use for safety netting, so for UTI, for suicidal patients and for sore throat. So having these pre-written texts makes you work in a much more thorough way, and ensures that the record for the patient is quite detailed and comprehensive. Running late is stressful for the clinician and frustrating for the patient. And here are some of my tips regarding this, with the caveat that they affect you differently in traditional and digital consulting. So in traditional consulting, patients may still hang around the waiting room for quite a period of time, and if they do actually walk out, it feels like quite a catastrophic event. Whereas in digital consulting, there's a much lower tolerance for running late, because often people have a narrow window at work or wherever they are to be in a private location. So you may find that they just cancel their appointment even if you're just 15 or 20 minutes late. So here are some of my tips. At the beginning, when you're just learning to work digitally, make sure you keep a crib to hand with all the common things you need to know. I've created a couple of crib sheets about common actions, and I share the Google document link to that to anybody who wants it. Don't let lots of incomplete tasks pile up. Initially, when you start, there are lots of consultations which raise questions of things you don't know how to do, and you can try and sort of keep them open while responses come back, but if there's a lot of them, it becomes impossible to not manage the session. So do ask for help if that happens. You can also ask your account manager to prolong or extend the induction phase, so give you extra sessions with extra slots, but this has to be discussed with the senior team at head office. On an ongoing basis, for running to time, allow plenty of time to log in so that you're starting sharp at the beginning of your shift. Use any spare time where patients haven't needed the full 10 minutes to look ahead at what's coming in case you need to look things up. If you do need to add things to ICE or generate gyro tickets, you can do those later in your shift when you've caught up or when there's a patient cancellation. And if you really are running behind because of a mental health patient or safeguarding, you can message live chat and ask them to cancel some of your slots and to help you that way. Obviously, all of these behaviours are monitored and measured, and the metrics are available to head office. So if your productivity is below that of your peers, that may come up for discussion. So these are just some tips from me personally about trying to work efficiently and access help when you need it. I hope you found this video helpful. Do let me know your thoughts about it, particularly anything that may already be out of date in such a fast-moving organisation. Hope it helps your first few days working digitally for Babylon.